This is the second of the two lectures on biome boundaries. Last time we talked about the prairie forest border. This one will cover the temperate and boreal forest biome boundary. Again, this is the biome map of the world. And what we're going to talk about this time are the light blue conifer forests or boreal forests, and the boundary between that and the dark green temperate deciduous forest. And you can see that Minnesota, right on the west end of Lake Superior there, has the boundary between those two biomes. So here's the boreal forest around the world. It is in Scandinavia, all across Russia, Alaska, and then it crosses Canada, and it dips into northern Minnesota in one place there. So Minnesota is really unique among the 48 states in having a few million acres of the boreal biome. And here's a picture of it. So this is the north shore of Lake Superior, and you can see it's mostly dominated by spruce and fir trees. There's also birch and aspen, and in a lot of the boreal forest there are pines such as jack pine. And here's a closer map of Minnesota showing the boreal forest biome in the dark green, and that it has this complicated interface with the light green, which is the deciduous oak and maple forest. And again, we've got southern edges of ranges of boreal trees like fir and spruce, and the northern edges of the range of temperate trees like sugar maple, red maple, and red oak. So there's a zone where the two trees from the two biomes are mixed together, and that's the ecotone for the temperate and boreal forest. So right now, Minnesota is right there where the star is. We have boreal forest, temperate forest, and grassland. And it's that temperate and boreal boundary we'll talk about mostly. As the climate warms, there's a chance that we could lose the entire boreal biome in Minnesota because it just wouldn't be cold enough anywhere for that biome to exist. So what does it take for a boreal forest to exist? Well, it takes cold temperatures. Can either be extreme winter cold, colder than minus 42 degrees Celsius, which would be cold enough to directly kill temperate tree species like maple or oak. This is an infrared nighttime image of a cold night in the middle of winter in 2014. The dark colored areas are around 30 to 40 below zero. So not quite cold enough to kill temperate trees. And in fact, for the last couple decades, it has not been cold enough in northern Minnesota, although it used to be cold enough on the coldest winter nights to kill temperate trees. So now the dynamics are mainly with the summer temperature, and you see places here along the Great Lakes in the light gray colors, the North Shore, Isle Royale, the Door Peninsula in Wisconsin. These are areas that have cool summers, and they have boreal forests because if summers are too short for temperate trees to complete their life cycle, then you can have a boreal forest even if the winters are not very cold. So there are a lot of interactions between the boreal forest and the temperate forest. They overlap in northern Minnesota. There are many, many patches of either forest type growing next to the other. And this is from a study that my PhD student Nick Fisichella did. And he visited all the sites with the stars and the red triangles and looked at temperature at those sites and also the boreal tree species and the temperate species, and whether the temperate seedlings were invading the boreal, under the boreal part of the canopy. So we looked at growth rates of saplings, radial growth of the rings, and also the height growth. By looking at the bud scars, you can tell how much height growth a tree has put on for the last 3 or 4 years. And here's what he found. If you look across a summer temperature gradient, so the cool summers on the left would be in the far northeastern corner of Minnesota, and the warmer summer temperatures on the right side of the x-axis would be close to the prairie forest border or further south. And you look at the height growth, in the cool areas, balsam fir and white spruce grow more than the maples, and you have a crossover point right in the middle around 64 to 65 degrees mean summer temperature, where fir and spruce and maples grow about the same amount. And then when it gets warmer than that, maple grows more than spruce and fir. So here's where a place, say Cloquet Forestry Center or Duluth or Ely, Minnesota, where their mean summer temperature was from 1960 to 1990, at a level that fir and spruce would definitely grow more than maples, and so maples were relegated to a stunted status in the understory of the forest. Now, some of those areas are close to the crossover point where maple and oak are growing about the same as fir and spruce, and as the climate continues to warm, say 15 years from now, we'll be into an area where the maples will grow more than spruce and fir, and at that point they'll be able to overtop the spruce and fir and take over dominance of the stand, and we will have a transition from boreal forest to temperate forest in many places. Right now, according to the snapshot that Nick Fisichella was able to put together of the landscape by visiting hundreds of sites where there's a temperate forest right next to a boreal forest, temperatures have warmed up enough so that the temperate species are no longer limited. They are able to invade the boreal forest, especially in the understory. However, it's not warm enough yet to kill those boreal species. Therefore, the ecotone, or the area with the mixed boreal and temperate forest, is becoming wider. And that's true at local scales, where boreal and temperate stands are next to each other, and it's true across the entire region. Here's an example of sugar maple and balsam fir at a state park in Wisconsin in a boreal forest, and you see a sugar maple sapling on the right that's about 20 years old, and some balsam fir saplings that are also about 20 years old. This location has a temperature that's right near the crossover point, so they're growing approximately equal rates, and so they can coexist. But perhaps in another 20 years the maples will grow more and the spruce and fir will grow less, and they will be able to take over this forest. Isle Royale has an interesting boreal and temperate forest boundary right in the middle of the island, and we studied that. So here's the temperate forest, yellow birch and sugar maple, and boreal forest with white spruce, balsam fir, white cedar, a few pines, birch and aspen, and moose, of course. Isle Royale is famous for its moose and wolf dynamics, as well as the moose and vegetation dynamics, which is what I'll talk about. The moose like to browse on hardwoods. These are some meadows that are created by moose that would otherwise be invaded by deciduous tree species, and the moose are totally preventing that from happening. And then these are spruce saplings, and moose don't like the taste at all, and they are not browsing those. So if the moose continue to browse at high levels, spruce will slowly take over the island. On the other hand, the climate's getting warmer, so the moose might actually oppose the initial invasion of maple into spruce forest, because the moose are eating the maple seedlings, not the spruce seedlings, and allowing spruce to persist in a warmer. This is some data from the middle of the island where the two biomes come together. And the blue arrows show areas where there's a very low density of sugar maple saplings. So these are areas that are in a boreal forest, but right next to some temperate forest. And it shows the percent of broken and unbroken maple saplings. So in those sites with the blue arrows with the low density of maple, almost all of the maple saplings have been broken by the moose. And so their height growth has been negated by the moose. They're broken off so that the moose can eat the buds at the tips of the twigs. And then we have two sites where maple has a high density. So this is within a patch of temperate forest with the red arrows, and the percent of broken maple saplings is much lower there. So the lower the density of maple saplings, the more moose seek them out because they taste better than the boreal saplings, and the more likely they are to be broken and then eaten by the moose, and less likely to be successful. Therefore, moose are preventing the invasion of the boreal forest by maple in the center part of Isle Royale, where the two biomes come together. Deer can do the same thing. I showed this pair of slides in the forest, prairie forest lecture as well, and this shows a maple forest with lots of maple reproduction, over 100,000 saplings per acre, and then increase in deer population, and 16 years later the understory of maple is gone. So deer can also prevent the recruitment of maple, and might initially, at least as the warming starts, prevent maple from being successful at invading into some of these boreals. So we have a situation like this in areas where there are very few deer, and there's a boreal stand on the right here, spruce and fir, and a temperate stand of maple and oak on the left. And with a warmer climate, the saplings of the maple and oak are able to invade the understory of spruce and fir. But with more deer, they eat those saplings and the invasion doesn't take place. And the forest, the spruce and fir forest, might persist until it gets warm enough to directly kill those, so it might make a transition to a brushland or a savanna, or some more abrupt shift in the vegetation than there would be without a high deer population. Interesting to see what's going on in Estonia. This is damage on the trunks of spruce trees caused by moose. There the moose seem to be damaging the spruce and not the maple, so they might actually be facilitating the movement of maple into the boreal forest by damaging the spruce. So it doesn't always work the same way in different continents, but in North America, moose and deer are resisting the invasion of maple and other temperate tree species into the boreal forest. Earthworms also play into this. They played into the prairie forest border, and they're important here as well. In the initial stages of their invasion, they create bare forest floors with mineral soil like you see here around this balsam fir. That's a good seed bed for spruce and fir trees, not such a good seed bed for sugar maple. So again, the earthworms might be resisting the initial invasion by helping to favor the seedlings of some of the boreal tree species. So deer, moose, and worms are pushing towards boreal forest, but warmer temperatures are pushing towards temperate forest, and right now it looks like temperature is pushing harder than the opposing forests. So the forest is trending towards more maple and oak and basswood and other temperate species. So here's the transition zone, and just like we talked about a few days ago in class, there are important wolf, deer, and plant trophic interactions going on in these forests, where when deer or moose are regulated at a low level, the temperate species can invade more readily than when there aren't wolves and the deer are at a high level and they're eating the maple and oak saplings. So the plants are being hit from above ground by the deer or the moose and below ground by the worms, and the warming climate will change the forest, but through a complex processes that involve the food web. So as we transition from boreal to temperate forest, we have these unique factors, the earthworm invasion and the high deer populations that didn't exist in the past. So as the southern part of the boreal transitions over to temperate, it's probably not going to be the same type of temperate forest that we're used to, so it won't just be the historic temperate forest that simply shifts north. So these are historic sugar maple forests with some oak and basswood that we're used to. So sugar maple, white snakeroot in the understory, trilliums in the spring, and so on. Sugar maple forests of the past. Future temperate forests that move into the southern boreal are likely to be different because of the worms and the deer. The understory is likely to be dominated by Pennsylvania sedge, which is the grass-like plant that forms a lawn, and to be quite different. Maybe red maple will be the dominant maple rather than sugar maple. So it's going to be a novel type of temperate forest that we'll see in the future because of the changed conditions and different filters on which species are successful. In addition to that, there are more windstorms than there used to be, and this map shows the frequency of high-end severe thunderstorms that cause straight-line winds that level forests. It's very high in the Twin Cities, not so high in northern Minnesota. What if our climate from the Twin Cities migrates north and they get the high frequency of high winds in the boreal forest? That might help hasten the transition from boreal to this is an example here, the July 4th storm of 1999. All the red areas were heavily damaged. The forest was leveled in those areas by high winds. And this is a before and after picture. And right now, or at that time in 1999, it transitioned from boreal to boreal after the windstorm, because that was before the temperate tree species were established in the understory. That's a more recent thing, that's just in the last decade. However, in the future, that might not be the case. Look at this boreal forest here in northern Minnesota, and you've got birch and some spruce and fir here. All the red in the understory is red maple trees that have turned color in the fall. You can see the whole understory is filled, so if this forest was to be hit by a windstorm and the big trees knocked over, it would be an instant conversion from boreal forest to temperate forest. So the conclusions about the boreal temperate ecotone are warming temperatures are allowing the temperate tree seedlings to infiltrate into the southern boreal forest. Temperatures are not yet warm enough to kill the southern boreal, so the mixed temperate boreal forest zone is becoming more widespread at all spatial scales right now. Worms, deer, and moose are creating an initial resistance to the change. They're resisting the invasion of the temperate trees into the boreal forest, and their density varies across the landscape, so the degree of changes is like a mosaic across the landscape. In some areas there are few deer, and the earthworm invasion hasn't reached there yet, so the temperate forest is very readily invading the boreal. In other places there are worms and deer, and that's initially at least resisting the change. So there's a mosaic of different rates of change across the landscape due to worms, deer, moose, and different temperatures, whether you're in the north where temperatures are still fairly cool or in the south where it's fairly warm. The future temperate forests that replace the southern boreal will be different than the historic forests due to the novel filters on species success, such as the deer and the earthworm invasion. So that's it for the biome transition lectures. And so I hope that gives you a good overview of our two biome boundaries, the prairie forest border and the boreal versus temperate forest biome boundaries in Minnesota.